On the 23rd of February 2017, which is 6.5 years ago now, but it seems like only yesterday to me, Electric Jesus took deposits and, in exchange, he promised to take two of his faithful, a couple of dead-set wealthy believers, on a Titan submersible-style space tourism flight, which would, he claimed, orbit the moon on SpaceX's Dragon 2 interstellar robotaxi. Imagine that. The flight was, well, I don't know, let's call it scheduled to occur in 2018. The plug-in prophet told Dave Berman in Florida Today on the 27th of February that year that, quote, "I think it will be a very exciting mission," unquote. Mr. Understatement. Now, drilling down into the complex technical details of the proposed moonshot, he said, quote, "It would skim the surface of the moon." Awesome. Winding up his Florida Today Sermon on the Mount with Mr. Berman, he added that this would be the first of many moon-skimming robo-taxi Dragon 2 Titan submersible-style tourism missions, which would see clients, quote, travel faster and farther into the solar system than any before them. Now, I am quite glad Neil Armstrong did not live to hear that particular bullshit, but when Electric Elon popped that particular red pill on that faithful day, I knew for certain that this was the best time ever for a human being to be alive. To see somebody finally scale the challenging north face of Bullshit Mountain, actually to live in the golden age of bullshit. To witness humanity achieve peak bullshit. To tell the grandkids one day, I was there when we did it. Bullshit is, of course, why evolution put Homo sapiens in play. That and plastic in the oceans, clearly. What next, I thought? I did wonder how future humans would exist in the post-bullshit era, being forced to live in a world of ever-diminishing bullshit and greater deference to the facts. Demand for bullshit would continue unabated, I suppose, but supply would doubtless be constrained. Bullshit prices would therefore inevitably spike. Perhaps there would be queues over the horizon at bullshit filling stations everywhere. Bullshit, I supposed, would eventually be rationed by the government in some heavy-handed way. It didn't look good, frankly. Thank God my concerns on this were completely unfounded. I'm John Cadogan from AutoExpert.com.au, new cars cheap, Australia only, website, card. Elon Musk is the poster boy for bullshit globally, but I would argue that we proud sons and daughters of Anzacs in Australia can blow him out of the bullshit ballpark on every day of the week, ending in Y. And that is what this video is all about. There was a great story in SF Gate from about a week ago. Tesla's dirty little secret on California's I-5. I'll link to it. You should read it, dude. It concerns a place you've never heard of called Harris Ranch, which is a sizable burger joint about halfway between LA and San Francisco. And by burger joint, I mean a massive 153-room resort with a pool that you can see from space, plus a ranch kitchen, prime steakhouse, horseshoe lounge, country store, express barbecue, and event centre. Oh, and it also has 98 Tesla superchargers right out the front. The biggest spontaneous eruption of superchargers anywhere on Earth. So, in a parallel universe, perhaps, where there's bound to be a Waco-style standoff between the Teslarati and the FBI one day, have a guess where that might happen. In our universe, however, Harris Ranch is an upmarket hellscape where twats in Teslas congregate en route. They infest the place in their insufferably self-righteous groups, basking in the cleanness of electric utopia, slapping each other on the buttocks and plugging each other in, so to speak. before eating, I don't know, half a dead cow on bread in the prime steakhouse with a wheelbarrow full of lard-fried vegan potato wedges floating in a sea of mayo or something. I haven't looked at the menu. What they're not seeing, mainly because they really don't want to, but also because it's hidden behind the nearby Shell hydrocarbon station, is a sizable diesel generator, which is apparently required to meet the supercharging demand at times of peak twat infestation. How much diesel is used to keep the bullshit charging show on track? Nobody knows. And Tesla is not saying. Their app does not tell you either, despite this being exactly the kind of thing it was purportedly designed to keep you informed about, i.e., how green is that electricity you're tipping into your Twatmobile right now? Dragon 2 moon skim? Too easy. Is the diesel generator at Electric Waco up and running? Too hard. This is what the view from Bullshit Mountain looks like. The dude who uncovered this inconvenient situation is a proper heretic named Edward Niedermeyer, investigative journalist. He scratched the surface of Tesla one day and he didn't like what he smelled. Ultimately, this became a book, Ludicrous, the unvarnished story of Tesla Motors. It's awesome. I'll put a link in the description. If electric utopia is in fact heaven, Ludicrous is the Bible they refer to in hell, and Mr. Niedermeyer is Lucifer's right-hand man. On the subject of Electric Waco being in part powered by diesel, Mr. Niedermeyer said in Ludicrous the company was running diesel generators to power additional superchargers, the kind that take 30 to 60 minutes to recharge a battery. To handle the holiday rush, their exhaust mingling with the unmistakable smell of bullshit. No Tesla Christmas card for Mr. Niedermeyer then. With minimal effort, you could write a whole book of jokes orbiting just Tesla's significant contribution to bullshit, and that book would stop multiple rounds from an AR-15. Champion of clearing the air, fined $275,000 for high priority violations of air pollution regulations by the EPA after years of serial offending. Tesla, of course, claims that its supercharger network is 100% renewable from 2022, so perhaps they've decommissioned the hidden diesel gen set at Electric Waco. When SFGate contacted Mr. Niedermeyer over that, he said, Tesla's claims about superchargers and fleet carbon emissions are hardly more transparent or credible than when I investigated in 2015. Twats in Teslas are, of course, so gullible that Electric Jesus can get away with saying anything. He has gotten away with saying anything so frequently that this behaviour has become normalised. There's no accountability whatsoever. Bullshit Mountain is a completely lawless domain. In November of 2017, he said that Tesla would sell a pickup truck and that it would be better than an F-150 and a, quote, better sports car than a 911. 6 years later, I guess he'd be well down the track by now with that base on Mars too, which he said would be up and running in 2028. That claim was made from his expedition to the summit in 2018, if memory serves. Of course, in 2020, looking down on the world once again from his peak, he said Teslas were also viable short-term boats. A Tesla works as a boat for short periods of time, as an electric car has no air intake or exhaust to block, and battery/motor/electronics are water sealed. Unfortunately, the Messiah failed to mention in that tweet that if you do go 100% Captain Ahab in your Model Y, you'll probably make a right Moby Dick of yourself. See what I did there? Because it'll probably catch fire in the days to weeks ahead. Might have to work on that alleged water sealing of those batteries, dude. Warnings of this fiery proclivity came several years later, actually, just the other day, in fact. Not from EJ, but following hurricanes and storm surges from the Florida governor and the various state fire officials, such as the Palm Harbor Fire Rescue Department. If you own a hybrid or electric vehicle that has come into contact with salt water due to recent floods within the last 24 hours, it is crucial to relocate the vehicle from your garage without delay. Saltwater exposure can trigger combustion in lithium-ion batteries. Florida State Fire Marshal Jimmy Petronas said ominously, quote, "Take this threat seriously." I note none of these hands-on first responder types said, "Yeah, Teslas make damn fine watercraft." Just saying. So, while it is kind of funny, I guess, to highlight just a tiny selection of statements from the summit and bask in the magnificence of such a truly elite performer, perhaps we in the glass house of Shitsville, Australia, should not be so keen to throw stones. There's a serious dimension to leaving the facts behind, after all, in favour of rosier-sounding bullshit. And that would be that in doing so, we're breaking the epistemology of reality. And that's not how serious problems typically get solved, is it? Here in Australia, you might put solar panels on your roof and be that twat in a Tesla and still wonder why nobody ever invites you over at the weekend to meet their sister. Go figure. It's not going to make any difference doing this stuff, dude. It really isn't. We are the world's largest exporter of liquefied natural gas. Oi, oi, oi. 87.6 million metric tonnes, trailed by Qatar and the United States. Daylight to every other competitor. We really are very good at exporting methane. 87.6 million tonnes of natural gas turns into roughly 240 million tonnes of CO2 when it gets burned overseas. And that's roughly 50% of Australia's total domestic greenhouse emissions. Like an additional 50%. Literally a fire sale. We send this stuff overseas to be burned in exchange for cash. And it is quite the big earner. Australia's path to net zero. We have committed to developing a 2050 net zero plan and 2035 emission reduction targets. This will establish pathways for our transition to a net zero economy. This is consistent with our international and domestic commitments. Australian government there summiting all 14 peaks on the Himalaya of horseshit simultaneously. Not even Elon could do that. If a human being were this delusional, frankly, they would be in a padded cell. Bonus points for saying it all with a straight face, dudes. But we're not going to stop exporting the gas, are we? Not really. Like, we can't afford to. Woodside, a publicly listed humongous player in gas, is also a pack of underhanded arseholes and a big political donor. They're currently using legislation designed to protect the victims of domestic violence to gag protesters. Because what's the point of being wealthy, powerful and having ministers on speed dial if you can't also comport yourself like a card-carrying cock? What do I really think? Woodside's disgraceful, dissent-gagging conduct is an awe-inspiring abuse of legal process and a full frontal assault on the freedom of speech by weapons-grade corporate douchebags, in my opinion. The first rule of Woodside's conduct is, of course, don't talk about Woodside's conduct. The questionably honourable Chris Bowen, Minister for Climate Change and Energy, and the equally questionable Honourable Catherine King, Minister for Infrastructure and Transport, etc., recently issued an interesting joint statement. Australia's first national electric vehicle strategy to drive cleaner, cheaper to run vehicles. I think they're both also in charge of the department of people who can't find their arses with both hands and a mirror. Quite a large bureaucracy in Fishwick, as I understand it, right next to Sexyland headquarters. You know where that is. Transport is the third largest source of emissions in Australia. This strategy will help cut our emissions by at least 3 million tonnes of carbon by 2030 and over 10 million tonnes to 2035. Gold medal in the 100 metres bullshit steeplechase right there. Transport's not the same thing as cars, you obfuscating, ministerial mother lovers. Transport also includes domestic planes, trains, shipping, nor is road transport simply cars. Cars, like light vehicles, are only about half of total transport emissions. Conclusion: this grandiose-sounding national EV strategy is the same thing as doing approximately fuck all. And speaking of things the ministers for the Fishwick Department of Arse Finding are doing fuck all about, perhaps it's time to talk about the elephant in the room, which would be coal. In addition to our gold medal winning export performance on gas, Australia is also the world's largest exporter of coal, by a healthy margin too. We are responsible for a massive 35% of global coal exports. This earns us a whopping $83 billion, which, as a nation, we simply cannot function without. Next is Indonesia, incidentally, about 20% of the world's total coal exports there. And then that fine, upstanding global citizen, Russia, 18%. Nobody else is even close to the podium on this one, by the way. Our exports of coal dwarf what we burn locally. This graph is from Geoscience Australia. Domestic consumption in orange, our exports in blue. It really is time to cut the bullshit on this, I think. You know, you can't live in a world without coal, or at least you wouldn't want to. Neither would I. Even if we can replace all of the thermal coal with solar and wind and hydro, geothermal, whatever, like quote-unquote renewables, there is no viable alternative to metallurgical coal. And you do not want to go back to the Dark Ages, dude. Like, you just don't. And that's what a world without steel looks like, essentially. What do you think we build our cities out of? Metallurgical coal, which is used to make steel, is in blue. Thermal coal in green. Also from Geoscience Australia. Massive increase in coal exports by us over the past 30 years. There is no reduction in coal, no plan to, quote, get out of coal. Don't waste my time. Claims about getting out of coal make millionaire moon skimming look freaking legitimate. It's there in black and white, or at least blue and green, from an unimpeachable, impartial source. Getting out of coal simply means we tank the entire Australian economy. Currently, we are exporting about 375 million tonnes of coal annually. This is pretty hard to conceptualise. It's like 20 billion stars in the sky. You know, you go, yeah. But if you stack it all up on a football field, you can see it because it would stretch 50 fucking kilometres into the air. That's halfway to space. Depending on how you define space, but it's higher than any building. I know that for sure. 50 kilometres, Jesus. You couldn't physically do that, obviously, but it's an interesting thought exercise that demonstrates precisely how much of this stuff we ship offshore. So, when you burn 1 metric tonne of bituminous coal, you emit about 2.4 tonnes of CO2. And if you happen to do that 375 million times by lighting a fire at the bottom of that football field, metaphorically, albeit overseas, with all of our exported coal, that would be roughly 900 million tonnes of CO2. So our total national greenhouse emissions, the domestic ones, are 464 million tonnes, okay? But the CO2 from all the coal and all of the gas that we export totals 900 million plus 240 million respectively, which is 1.1 billion tonnes of CO2. When you export as much coal and natural gas as us, double the nation's onshore emissions plus a bit, we're really exporting 1.1 billion tonnes of CO2 every year and just pretending that this is someone else's problem. This is what national bipolarity disorder looks like. Net zero. Shit, yeah. Chris Bowen and Catherine King, the national EV strategy, like 3 million tonnes. You go, girls. Our economy is powered by exporting greenhouse gas. That's how Australia works. If we turn that tap off, Australia is going to be an even more emphatically third world Antipodean shithole. Get used to it. You'd need rather a lot of in-Tesla twats to balance the books on that one, wouldn't you? 98 superchargers and a prime steakhouse with a big diesel gen set out the back behind a bamboo screen from Bunnings. Not going to cut it, dude. The honourable ministers for the Department of Sexyland's next door neighbourhood want you to think the mad rush to EVs, to embrace them, it's some kind of wide-ranging greenhouse solution. They want you to think that with a straight face. In fact, plans like this, proposals like this, strategies like this, whatever you want to call them, they're nothing. But they're worse than nothing when you think about it, aren't they? Because it's nothing dressed up as something. It's a cake made entirely of icing, and the icing is made entirely of bullshit. Elon Musk dreams of making bullshit this pure. Like he does highly enriched bullshit, B-239, the weapons grade stuff. We export greenhouse so profitably because Homo sapiens is addicted to energy. Energy is the best drug that we have ever taken as a species, even though it makes the ministers for buttock location and corporate douchebags like Woodside our pimps. People want to feel good about making progress, I get that, but they also want to enjoy what hydrocarbons do for us. This is an extreme dichotomy, and I would argue that bullshit is the only viable solution. I'm one of those people who enjoys both of those things, and so are you, dude, and so is every in-Tesla twat, incidentally. The only difference is some of us aren't deluding ourselves over our addiction. And this is, of course, the real beauty of living now in the golden age of bullshit. Anything's possible. You can drive a huge EV with a battery that weighs as much as a small car, and you can also delude yourself that this is what saving the planet actually looks like. Yes. You can go to bed patting yourself on the back or elsewhere for making real progress every night, when in fact you've done less than fuck all. The scale of this problem is so big, it's so complex, and the implications are so huge for the future, economically now, etc., that nobody on the front bench of any government will touch it. No one wants to look it in the mirror, right? Nor do they want to put a dent in any relationship with their largest douchebag donors. They don't want you thinking about this stuff. This is why they employ an army of people professionally trained to take nothing and sex it up as something. This is the main output of the bullshit factory. In a sense, bullshit is really our number one export. It's the only thing that we do better than coal and gas. Fortunately, only STEM-type people can tell that nothing wearing a wonder bra is still nothing. And because this is Australia, people who actually paid attention to science, technology, engineering and mathematics are such a friggin' endangered species that our votes essentially no longer count. Perhaps we can thank Elon for that too, but I think we would have achieved this without him. In the golden age of bullshit, anything can be true. And that really is miraculous. At least, it is to me.